Hi, I'm Alexandra, and I'm a bibliophile. Welcome to a lovely jaunt where we talk about literature. Today I'm going to be talking about Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. In this episode, episode 2, we're going to start getting into some of the analysis that I referenced that we would be getting into in our previous episode. And as mentioned, I'm going to start off by comparing characters, and we're going to start off with Mr. and Mrs. Gibson. Mr. Gibson is a kind and attentive father. He is a widower, as mentioned. His wife died pretty early in Molly's life, and he's the town doctor. And that creates a couple of really interesting facets for this book. First is that he has apprentices, and that means that they live in his house, and they learn from him, and they become doctors themselves. As Molly gets older and becomes more of a marriageable age and is an attractive young woman, this becomes awkward, and this is really the problem that is set forth at the beginning of the novel that he needs to solve by getting married. But second thing is that being a doctor means that he can transverse across the lines of social hierarchy. He can go into the highest houses of the neighborhood, as well as he goes into the humblest homes of the neighborhood, and he sees people at all levels of society. Now, Mr. Gibson is contrasted with Mrs. Gibson, the woman that he ends up marrying, his second wife, who becomes the stepmother to Molly. She is also a widow. She has 3 names throughout the course of this novel. When she was unmarried, she was Miss Clare, and she was a governess in the noblest family, I should say the wealthiest noble family in the neighborhood, the Cumnor household. After that, she got married and became Mrs. Kirkpatrick, and from that marriage she has her daughter Cynthia Kirkpatrick, and then obviously when she gets married she becomes Mrs. Gibson. As mentioned, she was a governess in the Cumnor family household, and after she becomes widowed, she runs a school, so she's basically a teacher. She is not an attentive mother. She is pretty, vain, and she's repeatedly described as not being very smart. And her follies are really open to ridicule, both for the reader. The narrator makes it clear when we should be kind of laughing at her follies and her less than desirable character, as well as to her follies are open to ridicule to the other characters in the book who are a little bit more incisive and clever than she is, and they can kind of make jokes to her face that she doesn't even get. As the governess, she's in that awkward social position, which is very much explored by novels like Jane Eyre, where the governess is of a higher social status than all of the servants in the house, and is elegant and noble enough to be the educator and company of the children of the house, but still at a lower social status than the family. And this means that she's in an awkward position of not having any power or autonomy to do what she wants, and as a result, she asserts herself pretty passive-aggressively throughout the novel. It's clear that this is the mode that she's used to using to get her way, because we all want to try to get our way in a novel or in society just as human beings. And for her, it's passive-aggressive, and it's clear that it's, as a result of her experience as a governess and her life as a governess. Right before she gets married, there's a chapter where we kind of get inside of her head and we see how much she hasn't been allowed to do what she wants to do. And I think in its own time, the novel is kind of, again, leading us to ridicule this character, and kind of because the details that are mentioned is that she tries to put on a dress that she wants to wear, that she knows she looks very pretty, and she's a very pretty woman. And the lady of the house, Lady Cumnor, says, no, go upstairs and put on, something more suitable. Likewise, she tries to arrange her hair in a way that is very fancy and in this French style that she read in a magazine. And again, she's told to do her hair in a more plain style. And that kind of tells 2 things. One, there's a kind of British superiority to French, which is pretty common in books from this period and earlier, kind of French frippery and French foppery, if you will. They're vain and shallow, perhaps, whereas the British are sturdy and trustworthy and more honest and not as vain as the French. And so that's kind of a bit of a race issue in the novel. But more than that, it really what is sort of like giving the reader kind of a wink to say, hey, you can laugh at this character because she's, you know, a widow in her late 30s and she's trying to dress up like a young girl. Isn't that so silly? But what I got out of it was actually that we see what a powerless position that she's in. Despite the fact that we're supposed to laugh at this character, I actually kind of sympathized with her, and it made her a more, you know, empathetic character for me to relate to, because she's kind of annoying in other areas of the book through her vanity and selfishness. So, Mr. and Mrs. Gibson contrasted and juxtaposed with each other. They're juxtaposed especially with regard to their daughters, so we see who they are as parents and the effect that they have on their children and the type of girls that they raise. Mr. Gibson is motivated primarily to do his best for Molly, and a lot of times that means that he has to navigate very dainty and specialized rules in this society of politeness. Likewise, Mrs. Gibson also has to navigate these rules, but she's motivated to get an easier life, and she's motivated by her own selfishness, her desire for ease and for pleasure. So she often is sending Cynthia away, whether that to be with other families or to be away at school, so that she can make herself the elegant lady companion to wealthy families that she's sort of ingratiated herself with. One thing that's common is both girls, both Cynthia and Molly, have suitors young in their life, and they're really inappropriate matches. And what we see is that Mr. Gibson, being the attentive father who's very much cares for his daughter, is able to intercept this situation and protect his daughter. Cynthia, being away with another family and not really as loving and as attentive to Cynthia, then Cynthia gets in this compromising position, in this compromising relationship with a man. So again, this serves the major plot points of the novel, but it's ultimately character-driven, and that's how you can see that this is a character-driven novel, is that the actions and the events of the novel spring from the interactions of the characters, not the other way around. So I know I said I was going to analyze characters in pairs, but I'm actually going to add a little triumvirate in here, because there's another character, Squire Hamley, whose parenting is also assessed throughout this book. Squire Hamley is actually from the noblest family, the oldest family. They can trace their lineage back before Henry, which is a pretty significant marker. Henry VIII, I should say, which is a pretty significant marker in British heritage. And so he's very proud of his noble bloodline, but they're not as wealthy as the commoner family, which, though noble, are a little bit of a newer blood. And I think it's quite common in novels that are dealing with polite society like this to examine that tension between nobility and money, and which one has value and which one has, one has social currency, one has practical currency, and how do we interchange these? And that's a very common question of a marriage plot is, are you marrying up in society? Are you marrying for money in society? Are you marrying for love? And all of those things kind of have to be balanced. He has two sons, Osborne and Roger. Osborne is the eldest, and his parenting, as I mentioned, is also contrasted with this. He is a good father with the guiding hand of his wife. She dies early in the novel, and it kind of emphasizes the importance of marrying the right person in terms of character, and that's a big emphasis for this book. In a way, this book seems to diminish the importance of social standing as well as money to a certain extent in favor of people of good character. And it kind of goes back to a common idea of this time, is that women are really asserting their power through their husbands. So it's the idea that the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the man's head wherever she wants. Right? And if you get a good wife, then it makes the man a better person. If you get a bad wife, then it makes the man a worse person, and the family suffers as a result. And this is a very common concept of the wife as civilizing and domesticating the man, making the home a place of peace. The man goes out into the world and does politics and deals with power and whatever. And then he comes back home to this world of peace, and she is the queen of this realm. But after her death, Squire Hamley has a grumpy, perhaps, personality. He can be angry and intemperate is really the word. And so his temper and his racism against French leads Osborne, who has secretly married a French woman of a lower class, to continue to keep that a secret, and it drives a wedge in their relationship. And so that's Squire Hamley as a father. There we get the particular emphasis on the importance of marrying the correct person for you. Let's keep the conversation going. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Until next time, I'm Alexandra, and I'm still a bibliophile.